Thank you. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:11 p.m. Please call the roll.
Mr. Dixon? Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So as we start each board meeting, it bears reminding what our mission is as a school district. The mission of Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in a first-class education for a changing world. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Connor and Rod, who are working behind the scenes to help us with producing our broadcast of our meeting on Channel 20, Zoom, and YouTube Live. Just a friendly reminder to everyone here that please make sure you keep your mask on and wear it properly over your mouth and nose when speaking. We'll now move on to the petitions and communication portion of our agenda, where we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comments. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to our board policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. We have a clock on the wall to help you with your 2 minutes. We thank you for your interest and your cooperation with the guidelines. We have one public comment speaker, Mr. Chad Anderson. Chad, if you'll turn the mic.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the time to speak. I'm Chad Anderson, REA Vice President. I'm joined here with Mel Gilfillan, REA President. We now find ourselves 8 weeks into the school year. We've learned over the past 8 weeks how difficult and time-consuming it is to plan and deliver hybrid and remote instruction. Folks continue to burn the candle at both ends while having limited success engaging students. We've learned how stressful it is to be in charge of keeping students and colleagues safe from an invisible threat. Students and staff are quarantined all over the district as some folks are falling ill and many others have possible exposure. Some buildings are operating under a skeleton crew, with so many more tasks and responsibilities falling on those who are left, adding to the burnout and despair. The in-building staff shortage has led to a predicted lack of substitute teaching cover, having to be covered by folks who are already at the end of their rope. With COVID positivity rates on the rise in our community and national experts speaking of the beginning of a second wave, the folks at the ground floor are left wondering, when is enough enough? We hear from suburban districts who did not start face-to-face, now pushing their start dates back even further, while their communities have lower positivity rates than ours. We heard from county health officials in August that 8% would be the threshold where serious conversations about closing would occur, but here we sit at 13.5% with no relief in sight. We asked the board, at what point is enough enough? What metric should we be paying attention to? And at what point is it in the best interest of the safety of our community to go fully remote? For many members, that time has already arrived. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would ask now if there are any board member comments. Mr. Dixon.
Hello. I just want to say a couple of words. Just simply, I want to tell everybody thank you. Some of y'all know that this would be my last board meeting. Me and my family have decided to do something else. So I want to say just thank you to the board, because when I first got on the board, they welcomed me. You really don't know what you get into until you actually get into it. Then you realize, what have I got myself into? But they were willing to work with me and share their knowledge, their understanding, and their experience. And to the superintendent and his cabinets, the administrators, y'all were there. There were some nights that I probably emailed you some a little frustrated, but y'all still hung in there with me. Asked you probably some dumb questions, but y'all still answered it. So, principals, I will go to different schools and ask them a lot of questions and pick their brains, and they were polite, and they shared their concerns with me too. Teachers, students, I simply just want to tell everybody for thanking me for serving this capacity, because I didn't have to. But I believe we accomplished some things. I believe the board and the schools district is heading in the right direction. There's some things that we wish we could do but have not done, because we're all in this together. It's not just the school board, it's not just the superintendent, the cabinet, our teachers versus the board. We're in this together because we affect our community. We help students to become better. And if one lacks, you see it in our students. So we have to work together. And that would be, I guess, the biggest thing that I would continue to share with everybody. We have to work together. Yes, there's going to be some arguments. Yes, there's going to be some frustrations or different ways we think, because you think on your right side and I think it's the left side, but we still want the same results. And that's for our students to be better. So somehow we have to bridge that and work together. And I want to I think I can thank everybody. All right, let me make sure. My family. I got to thank my family, because at the end of the day, if I go home without thanking her, I'm a here. So, I want to thank my wife and my family for just being there. And sometimes, like I said, we stayed up late trying to figure out what's going on with the school board and to understand it. And sometimes I took away from them to understand, and they seen the bigger picture. The bigger picture is to help everybody in this community. So, thank them, and I think that's all.
Thank you, Anthony, and we appreciate your service to the board. It's been a pleasure for us to work with you. Any other board member comments at this time? Mr. Rollins.
I guess I'd like to just thank you, Mr. Dixon, for throwing your hat in the ring and being willing to serve. And I doubt that you or any of us thought that during your short time that you would go through both ransomware and a pandemic. Yeah. So, it's always easy to come up with excuses for why somebody doesn't have time to serve, and it's nice when people step forward and say that they're willing to take the time to serve. So thanks. I do just want to briefly respond to some of the remarks that were made during the public comment session, because we struggled to get some of this message out ourselves. It's important to note that, as far as we know, from the data that we've been given by the Winnebago County Health Department, we have had 0 cases of transmission within the schools. 0. Nobody has caught COVID in the schools. We have a neighboring county, an adjoining county, Boone County, that does not have any schools doing in-person instruction, which has a significantly higher positivity rate than Winnebago County. That's a small sample size, but if you just look at that small sample, you could draw the conclusion that you're actually better off having kids in school as opposed to sending them home. That having kids in school does not spread COVID. I mean, to answer the question, and this is a discussion that goes back to last summer, there was a lot of debate over the summer about how and when decisions should be made about when to keep schools open, or how to keep schools open, or when to send kids back to school. And the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a statement that was criticized by some educators. And they sat down with the educators, and the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a joint statement last summer, joint with the two largest teachers unions in the country, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, and the American Association of School Administrators. Those four groups came out with a joint statement. And one of the things they said in that joint statement is that the decision whether kids should be in school should be made by health officials and should not be driven by politics. We have listened throughout this process to the Winnebago County Health Administrator. She is the one that's looking at the data. She is the one that is looking at the fact that there are 0 cases of transmission in the Rockford School District. She is the one who's looking at the fact that our positivity rate, while high, is lower than the positivity rate in Boone County, where all schools are purely remote. She's the one who's making that decision. If she tells us that it's time to go all remote, we will listen to her. But I can only speak for myself and not for anybody else. If she feels that it's safe for kids to be in school and for staff to be in school, I think we should listen to her. And I've pointed this out before. I'll point it out again. I've got 2 kids that go to school every day. I've got a spouse that goes to school every day. I've got 2 grandkids that go to school every day. And I've got an older son who goes to school every day. If I didn't think it was safe, I wouldn't be advocating or saying that I support having kids in school.
Mr. Siegel.
I also wanted to thank Mr. Dixon for his time and his effort and his quiet, calm wisdom that he has shared with us the last few years. He really jumped into this with a lot of enthusiasm and has brought a lot of great insights and ideas to our discussion. I would like to encourage people who are in Sub-District A to consider stepping up and trying to fill those shoes. It's not going to be easy, but please consider coming up and serving your community in the school district. Thank you.
Any other board member comments?
Hey, Ken, it's Jude.
Go ahead.
Ken?
Ms. McCullough, go ahead.
Thank you, Anthony. We'll miss you.
We forgot to mention that he had twins while he was on the board, too. So, all right. Next, the superintendent's report, Dr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And before I dive into talking about our system-wide framework for improvement, I too want to thank Mr. Dixon for his tireless service. This is an individual who stepped up to serve, has a large family, has commitments professionally to his family, to his work as a man of faith. He's been a wonderful example in our community. He will be greatly missed. We've tried hard to talk him out of leaving. Our entire community is going to miss him, but we're thankful that he is heading off to a great opportunity for his family in another community. And from the bottom of our heart, I know our administrative team, our board, we're all so grateful for your service to the Rockford Public Schools, to the community, and you will be greatly missed. Thank you. Okay. And I'm waiting for my... I've got a group that's coming to my aid here. Thank you. Okay, I think I've got control of the wheel here. Okay, great. So we are calling this our system-wide framework for improvement. And Mr. Rollins was kind enough to give us a very high-quality summary of this work before, but I want to keep bringing this back to our board on a monthly basis, probably at this last board meeting of the month, where we typically, under our new format, will have a slightly lighter agenda. And I'd like to talk about what this could potentially look like in terms of a year's worth of planning. Bottom line, the why behind this work, I think, is always the most important thing to think about. We want to make sure we are a system that always is focused on getting better. We have more than 40 schools, and we want them engaged in continuous improvement work. We want to improve the quality of what we do, and we ultimately want to make sure we have high standards of service for our district office and for our schools. So there's a Venn diagram that we shared with you, and I want to just review that real quickly again. In the center of that Venn diagram is accountability, and that is really the work of the Board of Education. What we're going to be asking the Board of Education to do with your accountability is to determine what happens if a school is doing really, really well. How can we support schools that just keep getting better every year or are attaining at very high levels? What do we do with a school that's maybe kind of in a steady pattern? And what's raised here is, what do we do if a school is having downward movement, if a school is really struggling? And we've had all three of those scenarios in our district. And so one of the board's key roles in this work is going to say, what kinds of services and supports can we put in place to help schools that are struggling, and how can we give more freedom and flexibility to schools that are really doing well, and how can we learn from each other as a system, the highest performing schools? And I think the board's work and accountability is going to be key there. And it looks like oh, we're back? Okay. I think I went way too far there. There we go. Okay, so one key area of the work is quality. And quality peer reviews are something we've done for almost 5 years in our district. Every school has tried at least one of these, but we took a break last year, and we are going to be retooling what the quality peer review looks like. And it's basically a group of educators from around the district giving peer-to-peer support to a school so that they can think about how they're improving. It's kind of the qualitative, or not necessarily heavily focused on data, but much more about kind of sharing and learning from each other and improving practice. The next circle in the Venn diagram is continuous improvement. We have probably spent the most time talking about continuous improvement. That manifested itself in a school scorecard, a first version of that we use to review our 18-19 data during the 19-20 school year prior to the pandemic. We talked about every school in terms of how it fit into the state's scorecard system as well as our districts. And a new concept that we want to introduce is the idea of standards of service and standards of practice. Standards of service, let's dive into that a little bit, means what is the central office doing to support schools? We want to develop a framework, and this is going to be brand new work, to think about how central office departments can continuously improve by a set of core standards for how they improve in supporting schools. Standards of practice would mean, what are the non-negotiables for principals, teachers, as they lead their respective schools? We've given the example of special education standards of practice. We could talk about how we're implementing a reading program, like at next week's agenda. We're going to be spending some time talking about Reading Horizons. What we want to do here is not have thousands of things. We want to have a very limited number of high leverage practices that the central office delivers in supporting schools, and that schools deliver in supporting the central office, or in their achievement outcomes, and make sure that we are keeping track of those and that that's part of our accountability framework. It really comes down to having some checks and balances in that area to make sure that both groups are supporting each other. And I gave you some examples here, which we're going to go into in much more detail. The main purpose of today, though, is to talk a little bit about what this work is going to look like this year. We are in a pandemic. And so we have no interest in focusing right now on trying to make a scorecard system work. We don't have a lot of the key data points that we need. You'll see that when Dr. Vosberg presents our performance information from last year. Many of the key points that we've typically looked at, like state standardized tests, SAT, have limited or no availability of data right now. So what we want to do is use this pause right now and spend some time working as a board and ultimately working collaboratively with our schools to determine what this system should look like moving forward. How can we improve the scorecard? How can we improve the quality peer review? And how can we build and improve the standards of service and practice concepts? You can see here is an illustration of what this might look like for us. You can see that we would be envisioning if a school has been struggling, they might be on a 3-year track with more intensive supports, and that would be based on some combination that the board will determine with input from others on how they're doing on that scorecard and how they're doing on the standards of practice. You'd have more of a moderate 4-year track for people that the schools that are kind of in the middle. And for high performers, they would get more flexibility and a longer period of time because they're doing well. We gave examples of what a 3-year school might look like in a little greater detail using the 2021, 21-22, and 22-23 school year. But we would not recommend using these 3 years because we think it is unlikely during the 2021 school year that that's going to be a good starting point. In fact, what we are really going to be focusing on in supporting schools and trying to help schools improve this year, we're going to be really looking at 3 metrics in the interim. We're going to be looking at, are we improving attendance? Are we improving engagement by how much students are able to log onto their computers and be connected and to completing their work? During their class link is a great tool that we can use for that. And third, we're going to be looking at passing rates, particularly for our secondary schools. But in the long run, we want to think about this 3-year track, 4-year track, 5-year track, and determine what we're going to do to support schools that are struggling and give more flexibility and freedom to schools that are doing well. Again, we think this year, the 2021 school year, is the time to develop. It's to build this system together. And so you're going to see me coming back over and over to you, I hope, at least once a month to engage in this work together. And we'll obviously be doing work in between those meetings as well and sharing it out with the board and getting your feedback every step of the way. The accountability circle, the middle of the Venn diagram, is the board's work. And we really see that as your responsibility with our recommendation to determine what those 3-, 4-, and 5-year plans look like. Here's the timeline for that work. So you can see work in January, February and March, all the way through May, kind of 3 core steps to do that. You will see repeated that there's a plan for quality to do the same thing. One of our big objectives for quality is we want to have 5 schools try this out. It's going to be voluntary. We're not going to make anybody do this in the middle of some very challenging times, but schools have typically had very positive experiences with the quality peer review, and there may be some desire to do that. So this is the timeline laying out there, again, from now through May. And then continuous improvement. We had a 1920 scorecard laid out. That work is kind of interrupted right now. So we're going to have to figure out what we're going to count for 19 and 20 and 2021 in a real low accountability environment. But as we build into 2021 and beyond, we're going to need training and as well as some work to determine. Schools need to know, once we kind of quote unquote get back to normal, how this is all going to work. So we think it's a perfect time to think about what we liked about the original draft of the scorecard, but also to spend some time thinking about how we can improve that with feedback from the board, with feedback from the community, with feedback from our schools. And again, there's a timeline laid out for that you can see in your presentation. And then finally, this standards work is something that is more of a creation for the first time. We don't have a previous draft to react to here. And so as we build that, we're going to be sharing with you every step of the way. There are going to be 2 strands to this work. One is, what are going to be the non-negotiables that we ask schools to do? And what are the non-negotiables that we're going to ask our district departments to do in support of schools? It's going to be a 2-way street of how the district office can help schools and how schools can improve and do those non-negotiable things well. Finally, I just want to lay out for you what you can expect at a very high level in this superintendent's report. Some scorecard discussions and introduction to the QPR and the standard system. You can expect that in November and in December. Over the next couple superintendent reports, we'll at least be introducing those comments. So instead of giving you the overview, we're going to start diving into the specifics of this. Come January and February, we're going to continue scorecard discussions. We're going to continue, hopefully, reporting on some preliminary work on QPR visits, really have some more details on the standard system, and then we'll start having the conversation, what do you do at the end of the 3-year track, the 4-year track, and the 5-year track, and who's on those different tracks. Continuing that work in February and March, and we are adding, what do you do if someone is going in the wrong direction? How do we support those schools? How do we support those district departments? And then finally, March through May, we would culminate with finalizing these systems, finalizing the rules, and then ultimately giving an overview to everybody, doing the training, and hopefully hitting the ground running come July in an environment that we truly hope will be much different than what teachers have been experiencing and will probably likely experience for a good chunk of the year. So again, this is not something that we're going to build and apply to this year. This is a time we think we can look forward while we are continually trying to focus on the metrics I measured to improve during the school year here. This is a very different kind of conversation than what we've had in the past, and that we're looking very future focused with this work, while very week to week as we monitor things like attendance, engagement, and our students' grades. So with that, I do want to give the opportunity for Mr. Rollins and Mr. Scrivano, who've been part of early parts of this conversation. Anything you would like to add about the board's work in this? So this came through Mr. Rollins' planning committee, so anything that you'd like to share, Mr. Rollins?
I think, first off, this is going to be a good opportunity for other board members to also ask questions as well, because I think we hit them with it for the first time at one of the previous board meetings, whereas Mr. Scrivano and I had both had some previous exposure to this. I have been thinking about this, and the comment that I made last time, I'm going to frame, I think, in a slightly different way, using terminology that we've been using now for probably the whole time that I've been on the board, which is the difference between lagging and leading indicators. We've got lagging indicators, and we all know that those numbers are bad numbers that really need significant improvement. And the theory is you really can't change the lagging indicators without doing something on the front end to change the leading indicators. And so the focus of this framework, the way I'm looking at it is this is the administration's focus on choosing the leading indicators that it believes will have an impact on the lagging indicators. And the lagging indicators are test scores, standardized test scores, graduation rates, all of those things that people tend to look at. Yeah. So I just want to continue to raise the concern, because I think it's something that we have to keep in mind. The lagging indicators are what people judge us on, and we have to make progress on those lagging indicators. And so, one of the concerns I have about this system, we haven't seen the whole thing put together. Probably nobody in this room is going to know how this really works until we go through a year or two of it. And so the question I'm really going to have is whether we end up evaluating ourselves solely on this system, which is heavily weighted to the leading indicators, if we don't see movement on the lagging indicators. And I don't know that that's necessarily a question. I don't know that it really has a response. I'm just going to say it's a concern of mine, and I think that's one of the things that we need to be looking at. We can all sit here today and agree these are all the right leading indicators to focus on, but if we don't see an effect within a couple of years, are we going to recalibrate?
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Mr. Scrivano, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah,
And then I'd love to get questions.
I think the principle of what we're trying to accomplish is, improving the quality of our individual schools through, these accountability steps that we're taking. And we're going to, as Mr. Dixon stated, this is not something the board can just make happen alone. I mean, this is something that everybody that's involved in the educating of children has to buy into and understand that, you know, there's a real need for school improvement, and it's got to happen with all the right players, and it's through goal setting and targeting and looking at, you know, steady improvement or whatever. And, you know, we're going to probably have some difficult conversations at some point in time when we find that there's not progress being made, and all efforts have been given to mentor or support the leadership of that building or whatever. So those are conversations we'll have down the road. But, you know, I don't know that you can wish this to happen without a good plan that everybody's buying into and participating in and understanding what the big picture is.
Thank you, Mr. Scriano. Love to answer any questions. I know the board has gotten a couple quick exposures to this, so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think the timeline is reasonable. You know, I think, of course, we probably all wish it could happen sooner.
Sure.
But, we know that I don't think we can even answer the question, when will standardized testing be back?
No, we don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is that we will start attacking some of the problems that Mr. Rollins has raised as we do a deeper dive into what the scorecard looks like and what quality peer review looks like in November and December. So this is going to come back to you in November. It's going to come back to you in December. It's going to keep coming back to you. So I gave you kind of, Mr. Rollins and I, over the last 2 meetings, we talked about this, gave you the whole. Now, like we've done with the budgeting in the past, we're going to break it into parts and keep moving those parts forward and answering questions and building it together. And then at the end, we'll hopefully put the whole back together and be ready to launch this as we go into 21, 22, assuming, obviously, that we're in an environment where it's possible to do so.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, sort of two questions. One is, given that you've got a timeline here, do we know what the actual execution is going to look like from the blocking and tackling side, meaning it getting the metrics and then responding to it? So that's my first part, is do I assume correctly that that part of it, given that we've already got a timeline, that the details are being worked on as we speak?
Yes, great question, Mr. Connor. To start with, we are going to be reacting to an existing quality peer review document and an existing scorecard document that we've already worked with in the past, and making some tweaks based on board and community feedback. The one that we are going to be building on the fly and having you react to is going to be the standards of practice and service document. That is the third piece of this. And we do have a special education portion of that that's been built out as an example, but we have the most work to do on that. But yes, Mr. Connor, there will be specifics for the board to react to moving forward so that you can react to the actual tools. This will be the last time it's just a high level.
Right. And a part of that, and this is not my second question, but really related to what you just said, is are the automated pieces that would say gather data, disseminate it, do the analysis, are all those parts? I know we have the tools, but it's a different step to bring all that together. So is all the work to do the analytical parts, are those in place so that when you start to get metrics, that those will all kind of naturally flow?
So the answer depends on which of the three parts. Yes, on the scorecard, Mr. Lowry has been working on that for well over 2 years now. So
right.
I am confident the scorecard portion will be ready to move quickly. No, on the standards of practice, because it is not, and service, because it is not fully built. And the quality peer review is actually less rigorous to document. It is more of a qualitative report typically than it is a quantitative or metrics-based evaluation. So I guess there's kind of a yes, no, and NA. So kind of one answer for each.
And my apologies, because I'm not on my second question, and when you say things, it brings up other questions. But sort of playing off what Mr. Rollins said, do we know the relationship of what you believe is going to be as much cause and effect as you can have between the leading and lagging indicators? So, and I know we've spent a lot of time talking on that, but built into this system, do we say, and I'm going to make up some stuff, that if we have more outreach to this number and we have more engagement to that number, that will affect attendance? Or, that's probably a bad example, but you get the point, is the relationship between the leading indicators, as Mr. Rollins indicated, and how that fits back with the lagging indicators.
So the way this will work, Mr. Connor, I think this addresses both what you and Mr. Rollins both are raising, and that really is the exciting part of the board's work. We will make recommendations about how leading and lagging indicators work together. We will lay out examples, but at the end of the day, when it comes time to determining what the right mix is, we'll ask that you listen to our recommendations to an extent, but at the end of the day, we also want the board. This is ultimately an accountability and support tool for the board. And so we want you to set the right tone with our guidance and with input from the community and our schools to determine what the right balance is for support and giving more resources and support to schools when they're struggling, and what is the amount of accountability that needs to kick in when improvement does not come. And it really is going to come down to the board being very clear on how it wants to set those targets. And we'll certainly give you something to react to, but it's going to have to be the board's tool.
So would I assume correctly that the governing framework will be through the planning committee, Mr. Rollins' committee, and that we will have, for lack of a better term, some open sessions with, say, teachers and parents and other community members to give us feedback sort of formally, perhaps in the committee of the whole or something, or,
What I'm recommending, yes, first of all, it's exactly what we're hoping to continue to do, as we have done in the past with some of the work we've developed a little bit in previous years. But I do recommend that we largely use this second or third meeting of the month, these full board meetings, because of how packed those committee meetings are going to probably be with everything flowing through those. So I'm hopeful with my proposal tonight that we would use probably one board meeting a month to have a combination of presenting new material and feedback and findings, and then we'll certainly do some other work in between those meetings as well. What we've done in the past is done kind of 2 meetings a month, kind of every other week, to have a committee working to get work done in between. So you should see progress every month, and then we'll give the board a chance to react to that progress.
Okay. My actual second question is a thorny one, and I'm sure everyone in this room is probably worried about this one, is that in the public comments, I think the implication and a lot of things we've talked about, I think it would be, I don't want to say foolish, but because you never know, but I think it would be an unwise assumption to not recognize that we have students that are already behind, whether it's in person or remote. Obviously, in some regards, because there's a certain percentage that have not been engaged on the remote side, is that there is a real likelihood that we're going to exacerbate our issues with students falling behind. And I think in the middle of this, when I read through it, the part that struck me the most was, if we have students, and practically speaking, I mean, I don't see how we don't have this issue, and I've been reading a lot about this online, and it seems this is a standard problem across all schools, is how do we address specifically the students that kind of were behind, and I assume are more behind now, and we have more students at risk, it seems to me that one of the things I said a couple months ago is that as we go forward, we have to specifically reach out and have plans, A, for at-risk kids already, but B, now that we're in the middle of this, other students that might be struggling. And so I'm not pressing you for an answer tonight, but I think as part of this, and it's a very good approach and it's very methodical, so there's absolutely no criticism in that, but I would want to make sure that within the folds of this, that we have something where we call out our issues with students both at risk and that have become at risk because of our current situation. And what are we going to do about that? Because I think, in my mind, and let me just say this is, a school scorecard will show that to a certain extent. But this is really, if I might say, a horizontal problem. It might be, 20 kids at one school or 100, and it could be 5 or 10 at another. And that's why I say it's a horizontal problem, meaning it's across. So it really isn't on one school. This is a systemic problem. So that would be an issue, a risk, that I'd want to make sure we address. And let me, because this is a public forum, let me say it's not because I have concerns about what we're doing, but it is because I have concerns about this group of students, and that we do something in conjunction with teachers, in conjunction with the principals, to make sure that that's addressed systemically.
Absolutely.
Any other board comments or questions for Dr. Jarrett? Okay, this will be an ongoing presentation. Very good, thank you. All right, next I'm going to ask Mr. Rollins, who chairs the Planning and Development Committee, if he has any additional reports or comments or wish to have any further discussion from our October 6th Committee of the Whole, which we had a long list. I'm just going to read the list just so that we remind board members what was covered under his committee. Was the budget calendar, the functional building analysis, the academic return on investment for freshman academy report, the school performance framework, and preview of consent items. So, Mr. Rollins?
I did not have any other follow-up unless a board member wants to ask questions that they didn't think of at the time.
The details of the building analysis, that's coming up next month, correct?
So there's two different things that we're
Okay.
doing. One is the functional analysis, and maybe we should have named it
And that's
different
the
things.
attendance
The
zone
functional
issue.
analysis is the capacity, the building capacity.
Right, okay,
That's what we did at the last
correct.
Committee of the Whole meeting. And what is coming up is the facility assessment analysis, which is the actual condition of the physical facilities.
Okay. So, I mean, my takeaway from the functional analysis on the building capacity is our biggest issue is capacity at our high schools.
It was the high schools. I mean, that's sort of a district-wide issue, and then there were a few specific elementary schools.
Right.
There may have been one middle school
Risa
as
maybe
well.
was it for middle school, I think.
You know, what that is all going to feed into, and I don't know what the schedule is for this or whose committee it's coming through, is recommendations, if any, on whether or not we need to do further rezoning.
Right. Okay. I'll now ask Mrs. McCulloch, who chairs the Performance Monitoring Committee, if she has any follow-up comments or wishes to discuss any of the things that you were covered and you covered in the October 6th Committee of the Whole.
I do not
Okay.
have any questions. I don't know if board members do.
Any questions?
No follow-up.
McCulloch? Okay. So now, Mr. Siegel, I'll ask you the same question. You covered the new website, Speakers Bureau, and the lobbyists.
That is correct. I did send out an email asking for ideas on Speakers Bureau and the lobbyists. I did get a couple of ideas on the Speakers Bureau back. I would like to get a little more input, especially in regards to ideas to talk about with these groups. I did take the opportunity to reach out to the REA this evening to discuss some common issues, and they have agreed to meet to discuss those. Just to let you know that coming up at the November Committee of the Whole meeting, Michael Phillips will be doing a student attendance boundary realignment report about 4 specific schools for us to consider. But also at that meeting, I will come back with what's happening with both the Speakers Bureau and with the lobbyists.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Siegel? Mr. Rollins?
Yeah, I think it would be useful when you bring forward the boundaries issue if we had another copy of that original functional analysis report attached, just so we have all that information at the same time.
Ken, this is Jude.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the purpose of bringing that back with the boundaries so that for your committee, to be able to disseminate that information to the family in those sub-districts, or I'm sorry, those school zones, or the purpose is what?
You asked
Mr.
Rollins or Mr. Siegel?
No. Oh, this is a Mr. Siegel question. I was just curious as to the reason that you're going to have him do that presentation. Is it so that we are, fully aware of where the boundaries have changed? Those recommendations were made in the first report. But is it more because of your committee's interaction with stakeholders that you're going to do this and develop some sort of plan of how to disseminate that to families?
The answer to the first question is yes, it is so that we can all have this information and be able to weigh in on how this is going to look, or just so that we're all aware of it. The answer to the second question is it was because this issue was assigned to me by Ms. Hoadley.
Okay. And rightly so.
Am I wrong?
Mr. Dotson, you want to comment?
Just for clarity to Mrs. McCulloch's question, it is my understanding that will be brought to our committee. We will be making a recommendation, is my understanding. Is that right, Ms. Holy? That's correct. So just wanted to answer that question, Ms. McCulloch. Our committee will bring it for a recommendation, for the recommendation from our consultants.
Okay.
For the recommendation because it came through Tim's committee. Okay, it doesn't matter. Whatever, I'll find out at the committee meeting. Thanks.
Okay, well then I'm going to ask myself to make any announcements or discussion on the governance thing. So we have work to do, and we know we have work to do, and we're going to lay out a plan to start tackling some things on that list of things the governance team is going to do. It's a little challenging in getting the right people there at the right time and all that kind of stuff. So, but we're learning, and I think overall the new structure of the committees is making some progress and seems to be certainly engaging more thought and more input from board members. So I appreciate that, and I would just ask again to help Mr. Siegel out with any ideas or suggestions that you have for Speakers Bureau, because that's an important part of communication with our external stakeholders. So. Okay, we are now then on to the consent portion of our meeting, where we include the following items: the consent items from the Performance Monitoring Committee, which are the payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, monthly cash and investment report for September, financial results for the first quarter that ended September 30th, the construction bid request log, the RPS managed work change order, and the recurring contract for learning A to Z, and the consent items from the governance committee, which include the meeting minutes from 10/13/20 and contract purchase orders, as well as the freedom of information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Okay.
Second by Mr. Dixon. Please call the roll on the approval. Or first, let me ask, are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? None. We'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the consent items.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We are now on to the closed session consent agenda items, including the appointment of Sarah Schaefer as a 10-month elementary principal at the STEAM Academy at Haskell School, the appointment of Rebecca Costello as a 12-month director of talent development, instructional design, and the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session consent items for student discipline, including the EIAs for students 8198 and 8199. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any closed session items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Being none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to board member action and administrators' action steps, and the only one we had, we already mentioned, was getting ideas and thoughts back to Mr. Siegel on the Speakers Bureau. So if there are no other agenda items, I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dixon. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:04. Thank you, Jude.
Good night.